Hello and welcome to episode 7 of the Cloud Computing for C-Suite show with Brad Nelson and internationally recognised and world's #1 cloud industry expert and thought leader David Linthicum. This show is sponsored by Nelson Hilliard, cloud computing recruitment specialist, placing great people in cloud, IoT, fintech and AI. In this week's show, David and I will be talking about the US Federal Communications Commission has repealed the net neutrality rules it passed just 2.5 years ago, and how will this affect and impact local small businesses and small websites? What does the lack of net neutrality mean, and how will it likely affect cloud computing for the Global 2000 in the US and the rest of the world? Hi Dave, great to have you with us on the C-Suite show. It's a really interesting one this week.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a huge issue here in the United States right now. Everybody's freaking out, so I'm glad we're addressing this issue.
Yeah, I know, it's a big deal, isn't it? Should C-suites be concerned about the net neutrality, or is this all really non-issues? What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't think it's going to be an issue for the Global 2000 out there. Anybody over $1 billion, they're negotiating their ISP agreements, and so they're going to be based on SLAs, and there's going to be no throttling. There's going to be no limitations of access to content and websites, things like that. And so for the Global 2000 to worry about this is a bit odd. And so I did get a lot of calls last couple of weeks for people concerned about this. And my advice to them really is to keep an eye on your bandwidth, to keep an eye on throttling of different websites, things like that. And ultimately, I don't think this will be an issue just because of the fact that the larger companies really kind of go in there and set all the legal issues ahead of time. So in other words, contractual issues that really kind of override some of the legal issues, net neutrality notwithstanding. The smaller companies could be at risk, and so they could find that some of their network traffic is throttled based on who they're dealing with. And for instance, and this isn't the case at all, this isn't real news, but what if they throttled Alibaba because it comes from China, and they didn't throttle AWS, they didn't throttle Microsoft, so therefore it would lead you to use those particular cloud providers over the others. And so that's no good. That really kind of violates kind of the open internet thing. Now, the ISPs, to their credit, have not said they're going to throttle anybody, nor do packet prioritization, all these sorts of things which are really occurring. Ultimately, this is about the ability to kind of provide free access to various websites. And if that's going to be limited, then I think the companies, even the smaller companies, need to vote for the dollars. The problem comes in when the companies only have access to a single website, a single ISP, a single internet provider like you do with Dodo. And ultimately, if they start behaving badly, you have no choice but to leverage that particular ISP. And if that occurs, there should be a real issue. There should be lawsuits. There should be a lot of legal issues that come into play. I just don't see it really as being something that's going to be an issue. And I know, Jimmy Kimmel came online and, talked about the end of the open internet and a lot of limitations occurring, and everybody's kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop. But ISPs at the end of the day are businesses, and they're not stupid businesses. So they know that if they do this stuff, whether they're limiting Netflix consumption via the consumer retail angle at the homes, or whether they're limiting access to cloud providers, they're not going to be in business very long if they're starting to do that. And I think that's really kind of what's at play here. So the capitalism thing really kind of saves us in the fact that people are going to be able to vote for their dollars. Now, there are going to be the odd issues where things are going to be limited because some ISPs are actually operating, are basically doing bad behavior, such as limiting access to particular websites, particular content providers, things like that. But I think it's going to be few and far between. Then there is going to be kind of a conflict of interest if they're providing content themselves, such as every cable operator out there, as well as Netflix, as well as Amazon. Are they really going to throttle some of the streaming capabilities of those guys going forward? But that's not in the cloud realm. In the cloud realm, we're dealing with business only. So ultimately, I don't really see it affecting much, but I think the smaller businesses should keep an eye on it. I mean, my advice to my smaller business clients, $1 billion and lower, is to keep monitoring the networks and make sure that you're pinging the different services out there. And then if you see a degradation in performance, that you start screaming pretty loud.
Yes, true. What's in it for the ISP if they're strangling certain websites? I mean, we can understand what potentially could be in it from a point of view of swaying cloud providers' business from, like you just mentioned, Alibaba, getting strangled, and AWS not getting strangled by the restriction. But what's in it for the ISP, strangling the web traffic to other websites and stuff?
Well, it's money, really. So, in other words, so a provider comes, say Hulu, which is a local media content distributor here in the United States. I'm not sure if they're in Australia. But ultimately, they come to the ISP and they go, guess what? We'll pay you $1 million a year if you prioritize our packets over that of Netflix and Amazon. And so, therefore, when you try to log into Netflix and Amazon and stream their movies, you have performance issues. If you don't on Hulu, you're probably more likely to leverage Hulu. And so that's what everybody's concerned about. So ultimately, it's about equal access to the internet and not necessarily doing these sweetheart deals, which certainly are maybe lucrative for the ISP, but for the consumer, the person who's trying to stream videos from different providers, not so good. And so ultimately, that's what people are concerned with. It hasn't happened yet, by the way, just to be clear. But they're concerned it will happen. But I think if it does happen, we're so reactionary here in the United States. We'll enact a law, some kind of a tactical restriction, things like that. So I'm not as worried about it. But I'll tell you what, everybody flipped out over the last couple of weeks. I probably got more press calls than anybody else, and really kind of talking about the cloud angle because of Mr. Cloud. I don't think we're going to see much in terms of an affect in the cloud computing world, and I'll keep an eye on it. But if there is, ISPs are switchable typically. So if you have, 5 or 6 choices in the United States is what we do, then switch. Go to somebody who's able to provide you with the access to the websites and the cloud providers that you need, and vote with your dollars. And I think the ISPs that are going to pull this stuff are going to go out of business.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. They probably will. It's just a scary thought, isn't it, that you lose that unless you've got the money to back up your website, that the ISPs could potentially strangle you. We have to make it clear. We're not saying they are at the moment, and we're not saying that any money's changed hands in order to do that from AWS or Netflix or whoever. So we can't say that that's happening, but the potential is there for that to happen based on what the FCC has done, and it's. Would you find it not bizarre that Oracle and Cisco are 2 major tech players that are also, that have backed the FCC with regards to this repeal? What do you think about that, Dave?
Yeah, I think the big technology providers, and this, by the way, doesn't reflect most of the technology providers in Silicon Valley. I think most of them are very pro net neutrality. But Oracle and Cisco, really have some reasons to have net neutrality go away. And actually, the argument that's being made by the FCC in terms of pushing net neutrality out is that the regulations are burdensome, and they're going to limit the business models of the ISPs to open up new markets and things like that. And there probably is some truth to that. So in other words, the limitations that are put forth by net neutrality restrict the ability for smaller ISPs to get in certain spaces and things like that. And so we'll see where that goes. But I think the fact that they wrote in opposition of net neutrality is kind of telling, is that they're going to have a impact in a positive way based on net neutrality going away. And I think that the other people in Silicon Valley are kind of reactionary toward it because they like the regulation, because they like the fact that someone's governing the freedom of the internet and making sure I can get it all content as I need at all particular times, and I'm not necessarily going to be throttled or restricted. But I think that's going to happen anyway. I think that if you let capitalism kind of take its course, I think we're going to be fine. I mean, am I, mourning the loss of net neutrality? No. I mean, do I think net neutrality will protect my rights and all this sort of stuff? No. I think reality is that the government doesn't do a lot to help us in this space. And I think they should get out of the way for this kind of stuff, and we'll see what happens. But if they do, if ISPs do come in there and they basically provide burdensome issues, throttling, packet prioritization, things like that, then that's when the government should step in. And I think they know that. I think the ISPs know that if they start doing this kind of shenanigans, they're going to be out of business pretty quick, because the government's going to come in and create laws and regulations and things like that to wrap around the bad behavior that they're doing. The other interesting angle of this is that, we think the internet stops and starts at the borders of the United States. The reality is that it's a worldwide web, and the internet is, basically allows us access to everywhere. And also that, other countries don't, aren't going to recognize U.S. laws and regulations. And so ultimately, people have to understand that we're dealing with a worldwide issue, not necessarily a United States-based issue. And so we have to deal with it as a worldwide-based issue. I always, crack up when, people talk about access to information and things like that. And the reality is the reason we're getting hacked and all these other things are occurring is people don't understand that everything's interconnected outside the United States and within the United States. And so these sorts of things basically cause undue paranoia. They're not really that of a big of a deal, and I just don't think they're going to affect the cloud space like everybody thinks.
Well, that's great to hear, Dave. And if anyone would know, you would know with your years of experience in cloud computing. So I hope you didn't spill your drink when I said that.
Spit take.
But yeah, no, Dave, thanks for being part of the show this week. It's been awesome as always to have you part of the C-Suite show with your input and insight into how the market's moving for the Global 2000, Global 5000 and the rest of the world. So thanks again for being a part of it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And so if you're a CEO, CTO, CIO, this is on your desk as a concern. I wouldn't let it be a concern yet. Go move on to other problems. This one's going to kind of go away.
Excellent. Thanks, Dave. Thanks again. Well, thanks very much for watching this week's C-Suite show with myself and David Linthicum. And if you want to catch David, he's on Twitter, which is @David Linthicum, and I'm on Twitter also, which is Nelson_Hilliard. Thanks for watching, and remember to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, because on this channel we have weekly cloud computing shows and also the weekly cloud computing news, and you wouldn't want to miss out on any of those. So please remember to comment, like, and subscribe. And thanks again for watching.